The public's nostalgia for retro consoles has been growing over the last several years. Nintendo kicked off a wave of plug-and-play style systems with 2016's NES Classic Edition, and followed up with last year's SNES Classic. Now Sony is looking to throw their hat in the ring with the PlayStation Classic, coming next month. We got a hands-on look with the system and want to give you our early impressions. Let's start with the hardware. If you own a NES or SNES Classic, the PlayStation Classic will be very familiar to you. It's a miniature version of the original system, featuring an HDMI port and micro USB for power in the back, and slots for 2 controllers in the front. The system's physical 3 buttons all work as well. The power does, well, what you expect, turn the system on and off, while the reset button works the same as with Nintendo systems, bringing you back to the main menu. The interesting one is the disc open button. This is used when a game needs you to switch discs. It's pretty cool that they found a way to emulate the physical act of switching the discs rather than having it happen automatically. Instead of a proprietary port, the controllers plug in through USB. Sony said it doesn't feature support for other controllers to be plugged in or for the controllers to work on PC, although I figure some smart people will figure that one out. The controllers themselves are based on the original system's controllers. That means no analog sticks or rumble support. We brought an original controller with us for comparison, and the Classics version feels very faithful. It's just a touch lighter in weight, and the buttons feel more clicky, but that's also probably because we are comparing them to a 20-year-old controller that's seen lots of use. While I somewhat admire wanting to stick to the nostalgia of the original hardware, I don't think anyone's gonna argue that the DualShock wasn't a major improvement over the original design, and it's disappointing that we won't have the option to play with analog sticks or rumble. In fact, without them, it will be impossible to appreciate iconic moments like the Psycho Mantis fight in Metal Gear Solid.
Now I will move your controller by the power of my will alone.
The menu is designed around the original PlayStation's menu, sporting a cool blue background and that memorable rainbow paint splatter behind the text. When it comes to settings, the Classic is very bare bones. The system runs at 720p with no options for resolution change or adjustments to aspect ratio. There's no borders as well, and no filters such as scan lines. While I personally never use scan lines, preferring a sharper look, there are elements of menus and text of these games that haven't aged gracefully, and scan lines could help make them look less ugly. The PlayStation Classic is designed to just plug in and work with no fuss, but if you're looking for a bit more control in your presentation, you're not going to get it here. When you quit out of a game, a save point is automatically created that you can then resume. Unlike the NES and SNES Classic, there is only one save slot, and each time you reset, you're asked if you want to overwrite that save. There are, however, internal memory cards that function just like the original system. They even use the same game icons, which is a great little touch. The PlayStation Classic comes with 20 games. With over 2,500 games released for the system, there was always going to be some personal favorites left out on the list. But even with that in mind, we can't help but be disappointed in the selection, missing iconic games like Crash Bandicoot, Symphony of the Night, and Tomb Raider. Games like Destruction Derby and Cool Borders 2 are fine, but not really something we're itching to play. Of course, there are big names like Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy VII, Twisted Metal, Resident Evil Director's Cut, and Tekken 3. There are also some neat cult classics like Oddworld Abe's Odyssey, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, and Wild Arms. I think it's cool a game like Revelations Persona is in the collection, even though I don't think the game has aged all that well. In fact, many of these early 3D games haven't aged well, and your nostalgia is going to be a big factor in your enjoyment for games like Rainbow Six or Cool Borders 2. As far as the technical side of how these games are performing, in our brief time they seem to run as well as we remember. Polygonal models hold up when scaled on a modern TV, but the same can't be said for certain UI and other static images. The rendered backgrounds in Resident Evil suffer, and text in Ridge Racer is so blown out it can be hard to read. This isn't really a fault of the PlayStation Classic, but rather further evidence of how poor some of these games have aged. Again, this is a case where a scanline filter might have helped out. Unfortunately, we couldn't do any direct capture ourselves, preventing us from doing any actual comparisons to original hardware. Overall, our early impressions are pretty mixed. The PlayStation Classic does exactly what it intends, letting you play these games at a sharp 720p with a simple setup and no fuss. But the product feels a bit bare bones, with no visual customization and controllers that lack analog sticks and rumble support. The game selection certainly doesn't feel like the greatest hits of the console the way the NES and SNES Classics did. We'll be putting the PlayStation Classic through its full paces next month when it launches on December 3rd.